Welcome to Post Games, a podcast about how and why we love video games. I am your host, Chris Plant, and I am so happy to have you here. It is that time of the year when the leaves change colors and the artificial smell of pumpkin spice wafts through your local coffee shop. You stop watching your losing baseball team and you start watching your yet-to-be-losing football team. And if you live on a college campus like I do, you bake extra time into every drive knowing distressed parents will be unloading their semi-adult children into their freshman dorms. Yes, it is that time. It is back-to-school season. Over the past decade, a small but growing number of those wide-eyed freshmen have arrived at campus with a dream their parents never could have imagined: getting a degree in video games. It may be a BFA or a BA or a BS, which isn't a pun, that's just the degree, or maybe they're pursuing a master's. But the end goal is the same: a launch pad for a life dedicated to gaming. Making games, researching them, teaching them. This week, my guest is Aaron Trammell, a professor at University of California, Irvine, who teaches undergrad and grad students about games, from video games to tabletop games, the craft of design to the critique of play. This week on Post Games, going to college for video games. Act 1, the dream of a video game student. Act 2, life as a video game professor. Patreon bonus, 5 new video game books to read right now this fall, because cracking the spine of a new book while sipping hot apple cider under some fallen leaves is the dream. And Act 3, of course, the news of the week. Oh shit, the bell just rang. I can't be tardy again. Mrs. Falconberry's gonna kill me. Act 1. The dream of a video game student. Aaron Trammell has taught college students about video games for over 15 years. He is currently a professor of informatics at University of California, Irvine, where he has affiliations with the African American Studies, Media Studies, and Culture Theory programs. But his core focus and passion, what he has dedicated his life to, is games. All of them, from ancient board games to tabletop role-playing adventures to modern video games. He has published 2 books on them: The Privilege of Play, A History of Hobby Games, Race, and Geek Culture, and Repairing Play, A Black Phenomenology. He has taught literally thousands of students and helped grow UCI's program from a side project that specialized in programming into something serious and significant that focuses on game design. Our conversation is all-encompassing, so I split it in half. In this act, Aaron will tell us about the video game degree, why students pursue it, who attends these programs, what sort of professional expectations these young adults should and shouldn't have. In the second act, we chat about the other side of a university, life as a professor. Why did he dedicate his life to studying games? What does he hope to accomplish with all of this? And we chat about those 2 books I mentioned, both of which explore the complex and painful ways race and play overlap. They are both fantastic reads, and I can't wait for you to hear more about them. Think of this episode like an entire seminar on video game degrees smushed into one amazing hour. So, let's cram. When someone goes to college for a degree in video games, what will they actually learn?
That's a great question, and it will vary by program, and also it will vary by degree type. What most people think about when getting a degree in video games is something like a bachelor's of the arts in video games, a bachelor of fine arts in video games, or a bachelor of science in video games. So those are 3 degrees already. And I think from a layperson's perspective, what most people think there is, I don't care what the degree is called. It's just a degree, and it teaches me how to design games. And I think that's the most common kind of video game degree. It's you go to college and you learn how to design games. The sort of thing that every program is going to have its own specific set of flavors for how they do it. Often one of those flavors is you will learn how to program stuff with a computer, but it can have other flavors too, including more design-oriented flavors. You take a bunch of classes, you learn tools like Unity or Unreal that are programs you might design games through. Often on the way to get to those tools, you'll learn how to paper prototype games, which means make games out of paper, or at least make like PowerPoints almost out of paper to show how a game might work. Occasionally, there will be a component of your program that's more geared around critique. And this is kind of the area of the field that I work in, which is not so much around design, although I do teach classes on design, but is more about how to think about your games as part of society, what your games do in society. And this is sort of the humanistic side of a game studies program, where there's some thinking about what is the game doing in this world, in our world, and also how should we think about it? How should we write about it? How should we talk about it?
How is a master's program different? Like, what do you need to go into a master's program?
To go into a master's program, you don't need to have an undergraduate degree in the topic that it's in beforehand. I would say it helps a little, but I wouldn't even go as far as to say that it's necessary or helps a lot for most master's programs. Usually in a game design master's program, they're looking for a diverse array of people that can fill specific roles. Like they're going to want the programmer, they're going to want the designer, they're going to want the artist, so far and so forth. And then when they bring people into the program itself, they use those roles to create kind of mini studios or teams that people work on their projects through, so that by the end of the program, you come out with really, really, really well-polished games. These master's programs are out there too. They tend to be closer to the industry than some of the undergraduate programs in there. So often people from master's programs will start looking for that first job. So they're really good professional opportunities. Although I will say with the industry struggling so much these days, the jobs are not as frequent as they were maybe 10 years ago. But master's programs are a big path there. There's a great one at University of Southern California. Rochester Institute of Design has a pretty famous one. NYU also has a famous one. So these are great places to go to learn game design on a more sophisticated level that will also probably give you a stronger corpus of networking tools that might get your foot in the door for the first job.
How long have game programs existed at the college level?
I would say about 20 years. It is the frame in my mind that seems right to me. Somewhere around the mid-aughts, when games were starting to overtake film again, I think that this is where a lot of colleges started to see maybe an opportunity in creating a program that really catered towards game design.
You're right. Like DigiPen existed in my Game Pro magazine as a kid, but there's something different between that era and NYU Game Center opening.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot about DigiPen. Yeah, and they're still going strong. So DigiPen is interesting. DigiPen is more of a trade school, although it is a college. But they are very specifically industry focused. So the goal of going to DigiPen is getting a job at the other side of DigiPen. Whereas most colleges don't see that as the explicit goal of education. And this is an important thing to me about higher education, is that for most of us working in higher education is actually about the life of the mind, which is a very kind of idealistic way to look at it. But that means that it's an experience that's about thinking about a thing and trying to put forward the idea that if I understand this thing, in my instance, games, well enough, it betters myself, it betters the world around me, and it betters us all. And that's what I would kind of describe the life of the mind. It is not about, here's a degree, and on the other side of that degree, there should be a job. That is more of a trade school model. That's why we have vocational schools and trade schools, because these are schools that you can go to, learn a thing, and then get money on the other side because you've mastered that thing. Without getting too far into the weeds, within the sort of history of the academy writ large, the academy used to be a place that primarily only wealthy people had access to because it was expensive to go and fund the faculty. And set up that system. So it was kind of a patronage model. And so for a very, very long time, the life of the mind was really only accessible to wealthy people who almost used it as a sort of finishing school. Over the course of the late 20th century, research models and economic models kind of changed and shifted in a bunch of different ways. And that space of pure inquiry and that space that once was driven by a patronage model, two things happened to it. One was very good and one was not so good. The first is that it started to open up and include more people into it. And that higher education was something that a lot of people had access to. This was profoundly good. I think living in a better read society, a society that understands how to critically think about ideas, was something that benefited us all. The other thing, though, was to accommodate all of these people. It meant less jobs for people on the other side, more competitive jobs for the people on the other side. So it no longer had that sort of like boys club finishing school quality where you'd go in, you'd get your tight network of friends, and then they get you jobs for the rest of your life. Having that many people scale up. And then it also meant that the funding lines got more complicated. So it wasn't just like patrons who were wealthy, like at a Princeton or Harvard or Yale, could come in and fund the life of the mind for their other wealthy friends. It meant things like government grants had to come into the story to help fund labs. It meant things like corporate partnerships had to come in to help fund dorms and make them nicer, to make them more exciting for people. And so what you have right now with colleges and higher education is a very complicated landscape of funding that does include more people, but one that is complex in ways that it didn't used to be.
How do your students feel about their professional prospects as they are entering, let's say, their senior year?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that any student right now is struggling with the state of the industry. It's just not great news when every time you read an article about what's happening in the industry and you see like 10,000 layoffs at Microsoft-led studio. That's just not a very inspiring thing to wake up to. So I think that's a challenge for them. A lot of our students here, you see Irvine, our first generation students also, and they feel a lot of pressure. One of the reasons their parents have communicated to them get a degree is because their parents subscribe to this older model of college degrees where they think that the college degree is going to lead to this sort of elite cohort of friends that will necessarily get you a job. And that's just not the way things are anymore. And so that, I think, is a pressure they feel that they're kind of disappointed by, because they're like, well, shouldn't there be a job on the other side for me? And the answer is no, actually. There's also a contingent that I would say these are students that are really devoted to what they're doing, and they're not really thinking about the industry. They're thinking more about how can I design, how can I make that great game that people will care about. And ironically, these tend to be students that wind up with the few jobs there are, because these are the students that are going out, they're creating, they're trying to network, they're joining the craft. But coming back to some of the earlier points that I was talking about, these are also students who often have the privilege of failure, of continuing to take risks, to invest themselves into their games, to their artistic work, and not necessarily students who are taking that safer path where they're looking for a job that pays 3 figures a year in Orange County so they can live with their family.
You mentioned the difference between trade schools and universities. Do colleges, knowing things have changed, feel any pressure to prepare students for alternatives, to not frame, I guess, their education solely around whatever their focus is?
Yes and no. As faculty, we have a lot of agency over what we communicate to our students, but we're not the only people who communicate to our students. They also go to advising offices that talk to them about stuff like career prospects. And some colleges even have advising offices that specialize in career development or job placement on the way out, and so that they have a different kind of know-how. And I can say firsthand that many colleges are invested in getting students to think about careers through a number of different lenses. But this is where the students often give pushback, because they feel like they've invested themselves in their specialization for 4 years. And by golly, on the other side of that degree, they want a job in the game industry. And it's not that smooth, right? Like, we can try to facilitate internships. We can try to leverage our industry connections as much as possible to put our students under the noses of the right people. But it's not going to be a one-to-one thing. And there's always going to be somebody who's better trained and better networked than you out there. And that's just the reality of the world.
I'm going to pull us back into the relative blanket comfort of being on the campus and not out in the video game industry. What is the current hot question or trend or interest that you are seeing amongst your students, both undergrad and grad, in games academia?
Yeah, the interest for undergraduate students is going to be very obvious when I say it, but the number one game that my students want to talk about right now in terms of their undergraduate work is Minecraft. We are square in the middle of the Minecraft generation. I'd say 10 years ago, it was the Pokemon generation. Now this is Minecraftville. It's Minecraft all the way down. Block turtles built on top of bigger block turtles, built on top of bigger block turtles. So yeah, Minecraft, I would say, is the biggest trend within the students these days. And then with the graduate students, and this is going to be perhaps not a fair question because these are students that come here to UC Irvine, probably to work with me, maybe to work with one of my other colleagues, and I'm somebody who they're still kind of excited about the work with. But the two things there are queer games are really exciting for the students that are working on a graduate level here. And also role-playing games, tabletop games, are really excited. Still haven't had many students dive into the board games, but the tabletop role-playing games, especially with the actual play, that's been a very exciting thing for a lot of students here.
And what is the biggest misconception about college video game programs?
That these are programs where you're going to play a lot of games. In an ideal world, I think that would be the case, actually. But a lot of programs have come from schools with curricula and curricular designers that are a little more classic in what they consider appropriate for the curriculum and not. And playing a bunch of games is not within the design of these administrators creating hell behind their desks. So I would say if you're in one of these programs where you have an opportunity to play a lot of games, or with a professor even who gives you the opportunity to play a lot of games, these are special things because not every dean has been convinced of this as an important thing.
Yeah, I run into this with game criticism and game reporting too. You have these moments of, am I dedicating my life to all of games or to just this game? And it's a tough choice to make sometimes.
I completely agree. I do think that for me, I would say it like this. If you're coming to games, if you're coming to game studies, if you are the sort of person who does not play games, and intuitively have a desire to play games, the road ahead is going to be rockier than if you're the sort of person who is just genuinely interested and curious in games. There's so many touchstones. There's so much less that I think you have to do if you're just seeking these things out because they're exciting for you. If this just seems like a growth industry and you're getting into it because you want to work in a growth industry, great, but just realize that a lot of people are driven by passion here, and that's gonna make the bar that much higher for getting involved with what the industry is.
And the salary that much lower.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate.
Don't say the quiet part out loud, Chris.
Yeah. What questions should prospective students ask themselves when they are considering a degree in game design or game studies, whether that's undergrad or master's?
I'm going to be very candid here. The number one question I wish students would ask themselves if they're going to consider a degree in game studies is honestly, are you interested in playing more than one game? Just like we were talking about. Every designer I've met who I've ever admired is someone who has been somewhat omnivorous in terms of the games they play and the games they consume. It's like that in every creative field. If you're a musician and you're interested in designing or in composing, you're going to be listening to a lot of different music. You're not just going to listen to one genre or one band. You have to consume a lot of things. If you're an author and you're looking to write the next great novel, you need to be reading a lot of things. And I'd say the same thing for game designers. You need to be playing a lot of different games and different kinds of games. The other thing I would tie into that is you also should be listening, reading, watching, whatever, a lot of other different things. If you are just focused on games all the time, you're also missing out on lots of different parts of the human experience that lots of people are trying to explain and translate through their respective mediums. And I think that good art requires people thinking on the sort of multimodal level and just kind of being thoughtful in these ways. So I think that's the first question is like, am I intellectually curious about the thing that I am interested in learning about? And if you're not intellectually curious about it, I actually don't know if it's the right industry for you, because at that point, there are better ways to make money faster and more reliable ways to get a job that's going to kind of be career level for the rest of your life. The other thing I want every undergraduate student and even graduate student to think about when they go into game design is that it is more connected to the history of toy design than you might think. And so I think a lot of people come into games, especially playing the highly competitive games that we have today that become esports, things like League of Legends, thinking that game design is very much about balance. And actually, I would say that that is a small portion of what game design is. And that the bigger history of game design is actually about toy design, making things that are fun for people to play with, whatever that means. And fun's, one of these complicated words. And of course, like in Repairing Play, I even critique the sort of pursuit of only fun, only pleasure in games. But I do think that a lot of games at the end of the day are just things that people want to sit down and have fun with and fool around with. And that is what toy design has been. And that's a centuries old art. And often it's not taught in the academy. It's the sort of thing that's taught by toy companies that publish games. And so there's almost a secondary education around what toy design is that happens when people get to the industry and they start working with people who are a lot less interested in balance and a lot more interested in like that moment that creates that spark of excitement and fun at the table or at the console.
Miyamoto and Gunpei Yokoi with the original toy.
It's true. You know this from working and talking to people in the industry, but they're all toy designers.
Yeah, it's 100%. Let's take a quick break right here. When we come back, we will find out what life is like as a professor of games. Aaron, why do you teach people about video games?
That's a great question. First, I teach people about all kinds of games, not just video games, but video games are a big part of what I teach. And I teach people about games because I love them, because I think they're important, and because I think the world needs good art. Giving some context for all three of those answers, the first one is kind of my origin story. When I was a kid, I have a crossed eye. And when I was a kid, I had 2 eye surgeries, the first of which only made the situation worse. When I woke up in the hospital after the first surgery, my grandparents, who loved me dearly, bought me a Nintendo Entertainment System. And as I was coming to see the world again as like a 6-year-old child, it wasn't video games, but it was actually a magazine full of ads for video games, like an industry magazine full of NES games showing me all the cool things, like Bionic Commando. I came back to see the world reading this magazine, and it really turned me into the person I was today. I did exercises for my eyes to get them back and working quicker to see them. And then all through my childhood, it was just video games were like one of the big things I cared about. They were always with me in that regard. And then came in college, and this is the point in time where I think I decided that they were important. I was living with a bunch of people in a house, and we had some younger roommates. They had a bunch of video game machines like set upstairs and in their room every night. And I'd go upstairs and hang out with them, and we'd play video games and chat. We were all like playing in bands together also. And at this moment where I was like, I think video games are actually taking over the zeitgeist in a way that like music wasn't. And this was back in 2005, 2006. So this was early days of when video games started to really overtake cinema as a mode of expression. And then, today, the reason I keep on doing it is because I think that games are interesting and important art. I want when people who think about designing games to actually think about what games mean beyond just I'm trying to entertain some people. And maybe it is just entertain some people, but at least to understand how profound that can be in certain moments of their lives or the world.
Do you remember the first time that you thought about video games through an academic lens?
Yeah, it was another one of these great moments along my life journey where I was like, oh man, this is where I'm going. So basically, after college, I had a temp job at Verizon Wireless managing collateral. And collateral, forgive me, listeners, for all this boring information, but collateral for Verizon Wireless is the little pieces of paper they give you when you buy your cell phone. So you get a bunch of pamphlets when you buy your phone, and those all come from a warehouse somewhere. And so that's called collateral. And so Verizon Wireless basically realized that they could save millions of dollars if they stopped throwing it out. And instead, they started shipping it around from warehouse to warehouse. So if they were missing some collateral in the Southwest, easy, just ship it from the Northeast instead of printing new collateral in the Southwest, which was their old business model. And so they hired some temps to manage a few spreadsheets, and I was one of them. And I got to tell you, this was one of the most boring jobs I ever had in my life. But the flip side of this was that I had unlimited access to the internet there, and a boss who really didn't care what I was doing when I wasn't tinkering in the spreadsheets. So I was just looking for sites to read, and I came upon a site called Game Studies, which was the first journal dedicated to the study of video games. And I just started reading it at work, and I was like, wow, this is kind of interesting. And then I started looking up the books. I'd seek them out at like the Strand, like places where you could find books that weren't Barnes & Noble. And so I just started getting into the academic study of games by reading about it online. And it would have never happened had an open source journal not been online where people were basically just publishing about games any way they wanted to.
Do you remember any of those first pieces?
That's where it gets harder.
Yeah.
No, I don't. The only thing I will say I do remember, and this wasn't so much an issue of game studies so much as it was like a big part of the field at the time, and my colleagues are going to hate me for bringing this up, but I will for the listeners anyway, was that there was a particularly contentious article written in like 2003, 2004 called Game Studies 101 by a man named Gonzalo Frasca. In this article, he basically argued that studying games was different than studying literature because of the way we encounter the text. There was other people within his group who had been making this argument, but it's an argument that aggravated a lot of people from what they would consider in this article the narratology camp, or people who study narrative, because they basically minimizing the kind of research they did. And it's become in the field the sort of thing like we don't talk about that anymore because it led to so much bad blood between people. So I do remember reading that piece, and I actually remember it being important to me. A person with very little academic training on the topic who I was just interested in like why study video games. It was a very clear, straightforward, and persuasive argument that today I would probably disagree with completely. But at least at the moment, it was important to me in my life.
Can you tell listeners about your current role in academia?
I work at the University of California, Irvine. I'm a professor here. And I do two things. I do a few more things, but two main things that are relevant to your listeners. The first thing is I run our game design and interactive media program, which is the game design program we have here at UC Irvine. And then the other thing is I'm a researcher, and so I write books criticizing representation in games and also books about play. And so I have two books out right now. One is The Privilege of Play. It tells the story of the white roots of hobby games throughout the 20th century. And it kind of, the ending's not necessarily a happy ending, but the next book, Repairing Play, kind of takes off where The Privilege of Play leads off. And says, there's other ways to play, and it looks to the history of Black people in North America to look at other ways that people play. And it argues that instead of just playing for pleasure, as we often do, which is also good, we should also recognize that play can be something that is painful and that has some sort of emotional depth outside of pleasure.
We're going to dig much more into repairing play specifically in just a second. But before we do that, what led you across the final steps into this profession? Because right now, you've read some good writing, but there's a difference between enjoying something as a hobby or even as a passion and, oh my God, my life's work will be this. So what are those steps from point A to point B?
Oh, man. So I would say for 95% of people who get full-time positions at college universities, maybe even 99%, you need a doctorate or at the very least a master's of fine arts. And so for me, that path was getting a doctorate. And my doctorate isn't in games. There weren't doctorates in games. I still don't think there are doctorates in games. So my doctorate is in media studies, and I got there through a field of called comparative literature, which is a very theory-heavy field that tries to understand different literatures as texts. And then I moved on to get a doctorate in media studies. Part of getting a doctorate, there's a lot of steps there, and I'm going to subtract a lot of them for your listeners. But one of the big things you have to do is take a bunch of courses that are interesting and relevant that kind of help you understand the direction of intellectual thought in your area the last 50 to 100 years. And then from that, you're supposed to also get read up on all of the newest literature in your field and synthesize those two things into something called a dissertation, which is a research project that pushes knowledge in your area just a teensy little bit further. And then you publish that dissertation with your university. And importantly, there's a whole committee of people. For me, it was 5 people, but they can be as small as 3. And you have that whole committee of people read your dissertation and they give you feedback on it. And so that's kind of the last step. The last gift of the doctorate is this kind of feedback session where you get a lot of intense feedback from people questioning and critiquing your work. And then after that, the thing that happens is you have to go through the job market. And this is the thing that usually gets the better of people because there just aren't that many academic jobs. So it feels a lot for most academics, especially after you get your degree, like you're literally just rolling the dice to hope that a job comes through. And so at that stage, if you're still with it, you're one of those people that just kind of like almost like stubborn, unyieldingly stubborn is like a characteristic you must have, because at this point you spent 10 years writing about a thing, making less than minimum wage the whole time for a job on the other side that probably doesn't exist, and that there still is a lot of people competing for. And so it's a big moment then if you can get a full-time academic position, or even if you can get a part-time academic position to pay the bills at that moment.
Do you have a moment in those 10 years where, again, you're making less than minimum wage and you know what awaits you at the end of this, which is some strong feedback and then maybe no job, where you look internally and you're like, video games in general, play, oh God, what have I done? Or were you confident? Was there something about it that was driving you through all of those challenges?
I think a strategic ignorance, maybe. It's like one of those things where if you think about it too much, it's not a healthy mental health place to be in. So you just kind of have to ignore it. And then also say, I got my degree at Rutgers in New Jersey. And I think I would have been more optimistic about entering the industry had I lived in California or a place with a bunch of big studios at the time. I felt like the people I knew who were getting jobs in New Jersey in 2015 when I graduated were working in IT, working in marketing, or working in big finance. And those were just things that I wasn't really interested in doing.
You mentioned Repairing Play earlier and gave a little bit of a brief summary of what it is. I want to talk about the book itself. I want to talk about how it comes together as part of your career and all the stuff around it. Can you give one more like top level summary of what Repairing Play is?
The argument I make in Repairing Play is that games are not necessarily pleasurable, that they can also be painful. Play specifically is not necessarily pleasurable, that play can also be painful. And this is a turn away from thinking about play that's pretty, even though it's not common sense, it's pretty common within game studies and within the academy, which is that games are good, games help us, and play helps us. It's always a constructive or creative activity, and it's often a pleasurable activity. But when you start bringing in things like pain, there's a whole history in the study of games and play of that kind of not being it, part of it. Johan Huizinga, who was a Dutch historian who wrote about play, famously didn't write about gambling in his book All About Play, because when people talked about gaming, that was seen as the taboo part of gaming. And he wanted to make an argument about gaming that this was so integral to our natures, and he didn't think that people would buy the argument if gambling was part of it. That's been, at least in the academic study of games, the sort of thing that people don't like to talk about, is whether games can not be pleasurable. Repairing Play really tries to dive deep into the painful aspects of play, the painful emotions that games and play bring up, by looking at play as something that also happens within Black history, basically. And so by drawing on all the ways that Black people play or have played that haven't been pleasurable, I kind of get to a place where I can show and hopefully convince the reader that, hey, play has a pleasurable side and a painful side. One of the reasons, at least as an academic field, that pain wasn't really so much part of the discourse for a long time was because there was a lot of political pressure that, in a very bad faith way, was trying to situate games as conduits of violence for children, right? If you play a game, the old argument used to go, you might become violent. And so there was a sort of like desire to censor games. And so a lot of the earlier academic work on games and play was a pushback against that. It was trying to do social scientific research that showed that games were actually really constructive for people. And for the most part, that they were right. It just, an unforeseen at the time side effect of that was limiting the conversation around the topic in a way that didn't get to the whole of the phenomena.
Yeah, I completely get that for the 90s when we're having congressional hearings about violence in video games. But there's a period in academia that is kind of a mystery to me, and it's when you are getting into it, which is the mid-aughts, early 2010s, and I can only refer to it as like poptimism, but for video games, of we're going to put gameplay mechanics in everything, gamification. And as somebody who's in that world, how the hell did that come to be?
Oh, man, I hope I don't name names. I might name one name.
Jane McGonigal.
That was the exact name that I was going to... her book, Reality Was Broken, was really, I would say that probably might even still be the biggest crossover text from game studies ever to reaching a popular audience. And, you know, there's things she says in it that are compelling, right? Like her argument there is that the world is in trouble. And if you look at what gamers are good at, you're going to see a lot of people who could solve a lot of problems really quickly. And it's an amazing argument. I still, when I try to teach classes, intro to the game classes, often on the first day, I will use that argument and say, hey, games can save the world. But then I like to also put it next to someone like Anna Antropy or Miguel Sicard, who talk about how problematic and broken the game industry is itself and how the industry isn't really doing much work to save the world either. Because I do think that these ideas ought to be in conversation, and it's a sort of thing that really gets people going when they're first coming to games, is something that might not just be for fun.
Have you seen the overlap of games and critical race studies change in the last decade, or I guess especially in the last year?
That's a really hard question to answer for a lot of different reasons. So I might plead the fifth with it, but I'll give you the backbone of an answer to it. But it's going to get probably more technical than a lot of people want to think about, because critical race studies is not actually race studies or cultural studies of race. Those are two different things. Critical race studies really comes about through a cultural understanding of race that moves through a legal apparatus. And that's one of the reasons it's been such a poignant area of conversation, is that it really wants to consider and take up the legal impacts of race on society in a variety of ways. And so within that area, critical race studies, conversations about games have been muted because, of course, there's a lot of many more obvious, problematic, and urgent things to address regarding race in our society. So I would say that's the first part of the question. Now, the other half is kind of the other direction, which is like, how have critical race studies informed game studies? And that's, I think, where my work is more salient, and the work of other people, to name a few off the top of my head: Gerald Voorhees, Lindsay Grace, Kishona Gray, Treya, Andrea Russworm, and many, many, many others. Stephen Daschel, who also works on Dungeons and Dragons, must give a shout out to. And here, at least in game studies, I would definitely say after the killing of George Floyd, of course, race also had a moment in the field of game studies where people began to really seriously interrogate it. Again, there have been other older interrogations of it. There's a scholar named David Leonard who writes about sports, racing games. He's been doing it for about 20 years now. His stuff is excellent, and that's always been within the field of game studies. But as with many things connected to race in our discourse, over time, it's not always a comfortable topic to discuss. And so it tends to fade out of the conversation and the discourse after the last tragedy or the next tragedy occurs, like 5 years out. It becomes less and less of a point of conversation in the field, which is kind of a cynical response on my part to it. So I would say, like, right now, we're kind of at the tail end of the new conversations around race, but there have been a lot more this time than there had been at any point in the past after the murder of George Floyd. So it's really impacting the field right now. There's a whole conference, I believe it's this month, called the BIPOC Games Studies Conference at the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. There's a lot of great conversations that'll be happening there. But at the same time, it's definitely not like the singular zeitgeist in games. Just how, like, after Gamergate, women in gaming became a big conversation within the field of game studies. This was kind of the next big cultural conversation. So unfortunately, we wound up reacting to these social tragedies within the field.
Before we wrap up this section, I have pushed a lot on video games, but like you said, you have tremendous expertise in the tabletop space. What is so exciting about tabletop right now?
There's so much to talk about. You opened the nerdy doors of my heart right there with that question. The very first thing I'm going to say about tabletop games is that video game developers don't design their games in a vacuum. They're playing as many games as they can. They play video games and they play tabletop games. So if we have questions about video games in our society and video game design, we have to have tools to look at both video games and tabletop games. Otherwise, we're just not going to understand where people get their ideas from. So as someone who researches games, beginning my research as a grad student, I was really surprised that there was such a big kind of hole in the research we do as academics on the topic, because, come on, this is half the picture. You don't get to Skyrim without Dungeons and Dragons along the way. That's, I think, the biggest thing, is that it informs our understanding of digital games. But then on their own, they're fascinating things. The sort of history of variance and modding within tabletop games alone is like one of the most fascinating things for me, because people just make them. You probably play it when you play Monopoly. You probably play a version that strays from the rules, and you probably don't even have the extra rules in your house. You just orally communicate them to the people that you play, and it gets passed down from generation to generation that way. Me, as being a big hobbyist, I'm on Board Game Geek all the time. I'm looking at variants of games. I've actually come to realize that was one of the biggest things I loved about the tabletop space, was that you could buy a game and then you'd go online and you'd find 20 other ways that people play the game and have developed the rules to, like, bring other themes and ideas in. And that's just, like, from a design perspective, insanely inspiring and exciting. So I've loved that about tabletop games the whole time. And I've always also felt like this was removing the biggest barrier to design from people, where usually you need to understand how to code, or at least how procedural thinking works in terms of game design, like thinking like a computer, to get into modding or designing digital games. And with tabletop games, you take that away and you just sit down with a pen and paper and you can get designing. Like, how cool is that anyone can design a game? And then take it full circle, you learn that that's actually how the video game industry does it anyway, is that they don't start on the computer, they just start designing paper prototypes. And it's just like, wow, we kind of missed something big there, game studies. It's like half of the industry is happening on this, like, tabletop strata.
With Critical Role and tabletop now being a gajillion-dollar industry that is filling stadiums for, actual play shows, has its reputation changed in academia? Has the way that people treat you as somebody who's a scholar of the topic changed?
Yes and no. So I'm not a scholar who actually writes about actual play or streaming that much. My friend Emily Friedman works on that. A grad student I work with, Adriana Burton, works on that. And I would say overall, there is a whole up-and-coming generation of academics who are really, really, really investigating live streaming. And it's a really interesting outgrowth in game studies because I actually think at the end of the day, it's going to have a lot in common with some of the common touchstones of film studies because of how big that side of the industry is getting. It's already kind of eclipsed the tabletop publishing side with the sort of just tabletop viewing side. And that's mind-blowing when you think about how fast that's happened and what that means for the industry. So I think there's going to be a lot of conversations there. And I also think that there's going to be a lot of conversations in social media studies and celebrity studies, these sort of subfields of media studies that really look into the impacts of celebrity, bottom-up participation, and viewership that game studies hasn't really historically been that interested in as a field that comes more out of design than these other areas. So I do think there's going to be a lot of conversations. They just might not be game studies conversations.
I think that's a great place to end it. Thank you so much for joining me and telling us all about this.
Yeah, this was a treat. Thanks for having me.
A Patreon bonus. We're going to split up. If you are a Patreon subscriber, I will tell you about 5 new awesome video game books that you should read this fall, from these absolutely stunning coffee table books to things that are a little bit more academic and in line with this episode, and a novel that is unlike anything you have ever seen before. I can say that without hyperbole. And if you're not a subscriber, no worries at all. There's still plenty more show to go, including the news of the week. So let's keep going. Act 3, the news of the week. It feels weird to say that we are entering video game season when we've had literally a gajillion games to play all year, but we are entering the season of big budget releases. It began on Thursday with Gearbox releasing Borderlands 4, the latest entry in the kind of sarcastic and foul-mouthed FPS that helped popularize the looter shooter. The marketing promises over 30 billion unique guns. How different 30 billion guns can feel, I don't know, but it sounds fine. And the Metacritic score seems to agree. If anything, it's effusive. It floats around an 86 with 63 reviews. However, a caveat. The game is an example of why Metacritic is an unreliable tool for making purchasing decisions. Major publications like PC Gamer, Eurogamer, and Digital Foundry were not given advance code, so who's to say if their opinions would raise or lower that average? Amongst players over on Steam, the game has a mixed average rating with hundreds of negative reviews, citing optimization issues, trouble playing with friends, and crashes booting them out of sessions. Hopefully, this will all be patched very quickly, because it seems like people are enjoying the game itself. It passed 200,000 concurrent Steam players by the evening of launch day. That's a lot of people enjoying a video game. Hey, did you know the Mario movie sequel comes out next April? Because it feels to me like we just got the original, and yet here's number 2, ready and waiting. This month, NBC Universal registered the domain mariogalaxy.movie. Will the next Mario movie take our favorite plumber to the place where no one can hear you flush? I hope so. Hey! If you are hearing this, it means Nintendo announced the Super Mario Galaxy movie during a Nintendo Direct after I recorded. In which case, wow! I loved the scene where Mario did that stuff, but I, too, have some cautious skepticism of the design of that one beloved character. And, can you believe all the sexy art on Blue Sky of other beloved character? I'm shocked. I didn't see that coming. Look, I prefer the original Super Mario Bros. Movie's weirdness over the modern Chris Pratt Mario flick, but I do have faith in Illumination to make a great movie. Like their criminally underrated take on The Grinch. I will put all my cinephile cred on the line to say it. Lastly, we have a gamer saint. Carlo Acutis was born in 1991 and died at 15 years old. During his time on Earth, he created a website where he chronicled Eucharist miracles, a specific subset of alleged miracles tied to the bread and wine, or the body and blood of Christ. He also loved Halo, ergo, the patron saint of the internet and the first gamer saint. Now, a saint must have performed 2 miracles to become a saint, and there's a very rigorous investigation process behind all of this. Both of Carlo's alleged miracles came posthumously, meaning after he had passed, and they both came from people praying to Carlo for help and recovering from threatening medical conditions. Here's a little bit of an interview from ABC News with Reverend Will Conker, who wrote a book on Acutis.
Carlo gives us hope. Carlo gives us hope that holiness is possible. We've entered a new era called the cyber era. We're on the era of internet. We're spending more time than ever on our phones, on our computers, and it questions us because we look at all those saints in our churches and we see saints of the Middle Ages, we see saints of the past, and what about the saints of today?
If you're interested in the story, I strongly recommend you read Aftermath's piece from April titled The Politics, Theology, and Hype Behind the First Gamer Saint. I'll link it in the show notes. It's excellent and written in a way that I find very beautiful and informative, skeptical but not snarky. It's just a great read. And that is the news of the week. Congratulations! You have graduated from Post Games University with a perfect GPA. Next week, Microsoft before the mess. Despite billions of dollars in acquisitions and an appealing subscription service, Microsoft's Xbox division can't seem to pull out of its rapid descent. Steam has beaten it on PC, Sony in home consoles, and Nintendo on handhelds. Microsoft itself faces increasing headwinds as the BDS protest ask supporters to boycott a wide range of Xbox products, from Call of Duty to Game Pass. And its reputation is in the mud following thousands of layoffs, multiple studio closures, and the cancellation of many games. This heel turn or downturn, or whatever you want to call it, has had me curious about the early days of Xbox, when the company seemed like an exciting alternative to Nintendo's kids catalog and PlayStation's gritty grown-up games. So I reached out to someone I respect on the early days of Microsoft and Xbox more than, well, pretty much anybody else. My guest is Shannon Loftus, an unsung hero of video game development. Shannon arrived at Microsoft in 1994, and she was working on games when the internal team could be counted on your fingers and toes. Over the years, she would climb the corporate ladder, playing key roles in every major gaming initiative, from the launch of the Xbox to the death of the company's plan for an all-in-one entertainment machine. She has an extremely rare and extremely valuable perspective of a major video game publisher, from the bottom rungs of the ladder to very near the tippy top. But, like I said, that's next week. For now, I begin my farewell. A reminder, post-game supporters get the show and the newsletter early on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern or earlier. They get extra acts and bonus materials. This week, Patreon listeners got 5 new books about video games that you should check out immediately and enjoy with some tasty pumpkin spice deliciousness. Each month, they get a video in my ongoing series, Video Game Journalism 101. I also published an audiobook version of the history of Street Fighter the movie. It is a treat, and no ads on anything. Subscribe to Patreon at patreon.com/postgames. Subscribe to the newsletter for free at post.games. Post Games logo by James Barham. Theme by Mark Sparling. And a special thank you to this week's guest, my friend Aaron Trammell. Like the show? Leave a review on Apple or Spotify, or share the show with a friend. Thank you so much for listening. I'm always so happy to have you. I'll see you next week.